Hello everyone and Assalamu alaikum. This is Introduction to Psychology Part 1 by Dear Knowledge. Okay, till now we have successfully completed Chapter 4 of Sensation, and I've given a link in the description box, as well as I've compiled all those videos of Sensation in one single playlist. If you haven't watched those videos, you can either check the description box or you can ask me in the comment section. I will provide the links of those videos for you. And I have also compiled all those lectures in a playlist, so you can visit the playlist site and you can watch all those videos. And this video is about perception, and from today we will start chapter 5, which is about perception. And I've been receiving lots of requests regarding topics related to sensation and perception, so we have successfully completed the topic of sensation. And from today we will start chapter 5, which is about perception. So I have divided this lecture into different parts because it is a very lengthy and very detailed topic to discuss. So in this video we'll start with lesson 1, which is about definitions of perception, types of perception process, and then we'll discuss about nature of perception, then characteristics of perception, and in the end we'll discuss about processes that are involved in perception. So let's start with today's video. Definitions of perception. So I've included different definitions of perception, and you'll notice about what different people said about perception and what different people gave different definitions about perception, and how the definition of perception varied from time to time. So according to Boring and E.T. 1942, according to him, sensation refers to the action by a receptor when it is stimulated, and perception refers to the meaning given to the sensation. And Hebb in 1966 uses the term sensation when referring to the activity in neural paths up to and including the corresponding sensory areas in the brain. And according to him, perception, however, is defined as mediating process to which sensation gives rise directly, and it is a process that mediates between sensation and behavior, and it is initiated by sensation but not completely determined by it. So, according to Eysenck in 1972, perception is a psychological function which enables the organism to receive and process information. And then, according to Edmund Fantino and G.H. Renolds in 1975, perception is the organizing process by which we interpret our sensory input. Then, according to Desiderato and D.B. Howieson and J.H. Jackson in 1976, perception is the experience of object, events, or relationship obtained by extracting information from and interpreting sensations. Then, according to Harvey Irvin in 1979, perception is the process by which brain constructs an internal representation of the outside world, and this internal representation is what we experience as reality, and it follows us to behave in such a way that we survive in the world. And then, according to Charlie G. Morris in 1979, he said, according to Charles G. Morris, all the processes involved in creating meaningful pattern out of a jumble of sensory impressions fall under the general capacity or category of perception. Then Silverman in 1979, perception is an individual's awareness aspect of behavior, and for it is the way each person processes the raw data he or she receives from the environment into meaningful patterns. Then, according to Levin and Schiffner in 1981, perception refers to the way in which we interpret the information gathered and processed by the senses. In a word, we sense the presence of a stimulus, but we perceive what it is. Then Woodworth in 1991, according to him, The effortless multimodal process of perception can be defined as the brain's attempt to describe objects and events in the world based on sensory input and knowledge. Then, second last definition is about, according to Woodworth, according to him, in perception, the chain of events is stimulus, and response of the sense organ, sensory nerve, and first cortical response, which is perception, and last but not least, according to Mohsin, the simplest act of perception involves the setting of the stimulus field into figure and background relationship. So this was all about the definitions of perception. Now let's start discussion on the types of perception process. So there are two different types of perception processes and how processing is done in perception. So the first one is the bottom-up processing, and the second one is top-down processing. So I've included the definition of bottom-up processing. The definition is information processing that emphasizes the importance of the sensory receptors in detecting the basic features of a stimulus in the process of recognizing a whole pattern, analyzes that moves from the parts to the whole, also called data-driven processing. So psychologists sometimes refer to this flow of sensory data from the sensory receptors to the brain as bottom-up processing. It is also called data-driven processing. Now, bottom-up processing is often at work when we are confronted with an ambiguous stimulus. For example, imagine trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle, and one piece at a time, and without knowing what the final picture will be. And to accomplish this task, you would work with the individual puzzle pieces to build the image from the bottom up, that is, from its constituent parts. But as we interact with our environment, many of our perceptions are shaped by top-down processing, which is also referred to as conceptually driven processing. So top-down processing is information processing that emphasizes the importance of the observer's knowledge, expectations, and other cognitive processes in arriving at meaningful perception. Analysis that moves from the whole to the parts, also called conceptually driven processing. Top-down processing occurs when we draw on our knowledge, experience, expectation, and other cognitive processes to arrive at meaningful perception, such as people or objects in a particular context. Now, bottom-up and top-down processes are involved in our everyday life. Clearly, bottom-up and top-down processing are both necessary to explain how we arrive at perceptual conclusion, but whether we are using bottom-up or top-down processing, a useful way to think about perception is to consider the basic perceptual questions we must answer in order to survive. And we exist in ever-changing environment that is filled with objects that may be standing still or moving just like ourselves. So whether it is a bulldozer or a bowling ball, we need to be able to identify objects, locate the objects in space, and if they are moving their track or if they're moving, track their motion. So thus our perceptual processes must help us to organize our sensation to answer three basic important questions. What is it, and how far is it, and where is it going? So this is what we will be discussing in our video and in this chapter of sensation. So let's start with the nature of perception. Now, in our previous chapter, which was about sensation, in that chapter we have discussed the nature and various kinds of sensory processes that are used for gathering information about the internal and external world. Though the processes are used for they became aware of the present stimuli in the environment. So this awareness involves elementary form of mental cognition about certain features of the present stimuli, such as size, shape, color, intensity, brightness, etc. So sensory experience are the mental images of the objects and which are present in the immediate environment that impinges on our sense organ. So sensory experience do not provide cognition of the object's reality, but about the nature of sensation. So it is a cognition in reality. So perception is a mental process of identifying the object in its real form and assessing a meaning to the sensory detail collected through sensory channels. So in this sense, perception is a both presentative and representative process. For example, through sensory channel, we come to know that there is an object which is round in shape, but through perception, we identify this particular object as a ball, which is used for playing. And the round shape characteristic sensory experience is assigned an identifying name that clarifies the nature, kind, and use of the object. Now, this is basically perception is an experience of the objects or persons which are present before the experiencing individual, which is the perceiver. So, an individual lives in a constantly changing world of experiences, and that individual sees things, hears sounds, feels, tastes, and smells, and all these senses produce they produce sensible experience. So about things and sounds that he looks, hears, feels, tastes, and smells. So thus perception refers to the way the world looks, and sounds or felt, and this perceived world is one's immediate experience. And then perception is an active process. It is not merely a mirror where one becomes aware of what is out there. It is a mental process by which sensory data and relevant past experience are organized into an united whole, generalized and discriminated so as to give the most structured, meaningful picture of the sensed object or things. So in this sense, it is representative in nature because the perceptual experience represents the object that are sensed, but however, it is not just a point representation of the stimulus field. So the perceptual experience include objects and relationships and points of spatial focus. So often some elements of the stimulus field are ignored and distorted or exaggerated or even changed to make a more meaningful whole. So in this process of organizing the clear pattern of the stimuli and relevant past experiences are not only useful but also play important role, and these serve as vital aids, and it is the function on the part of the brain that actively process the input to provide a stable and meaningful patterns of the object, things, or persons before us. So perception is an active process. Then perception, last one is about that perception is selective in nature because we perceive only those objects or person that come into inner focus of attention and do not perceive those which are not in the margin. So this was about the nature of perception, and then we'll start about the characteristics of perception, which is quite detailed topic to discuss. So I've included some important characteristics of perceptions. Now, perception, as we have just defined and described, is an active mental process by which the sensory input is organized and interpreted through mental processing done by the cortex, which is the higher center of the brain. So this processing involves operation of a set of variables that intervene between sensory stimulation and cognition in reality. So this kind of experience has certain characteristic features which we will be discussing in this video. So the first one is that perception is a complex mental process. Now, perception involves several processes through receptor process, symbolic process, affective and aesthetic processes, and organizational processes. You can also call it unification. So it also involves retrieved of past memories and recognizing in a meaningful way. So it is a process of sensing the object in the reality that involves several processes and therefore a complex process of mental cognition. Then the second one is perception is immediate in nature. Now, perception in fact is itself not a knowledge about the object, but it is a mental process of acquiring knowledge about the object in the environment, which is present here and now. Now, in this process, the sensory input to the cortex is interpreted, and sensory input is a raw undigested information about the stimulus. So the cortex processes this information in the light of relevant memory, and thus the disorganized bundle of sensation are interpreted into meaningful information of the immediate environment. Perception is a knowledge about the object or person which is present before the perceiver here and now. So that is, it is a knowledge about this stimulating condition which is immediately present and impinges on the sense organs. So this indicates the characteristic of immediateness of perceptual experience. And to make it more clear, take for instance an individual meets a friend in his office. Now here he perceives his friends who is immediately present before him. So after some time he leaves the office and goes. Now on returning home after the office hours, he reports to his family about the friend he has met in the office. Now, while informing about the person to his family members, he may have an image of the person in his mind, but this will not be called perception because at the moment the person is not immediately present before him. Then there is the third point is perception is an active mental process. Perception is not merely sensory impression, but certain activities go on in the cortex as soon as the sensory data are transmitted. So these activities involves organizing the sensory data, relating them to relevant past experiences, gathering the organized information that, for example, close to the past, images stored in the long-term memory, and abstracting them from those which seem dissimilar, and finally assigning meaning to the organized pattern by which it is identified as a focus. So in doing so, certain details are ignored or the missing details are filled up to provide sensible meaning to the object. So for example, when we look at a sofa in the room, the entire element of the object are not looked, such as only two legs are sensed, and still we perceive it as a sofa which has four legs. Then the fourth point is that perception is selective in nature. Now, at a given moment, multitude of stimuli stimulate our sense organ, but we do not perceive each and every stimuli. We take in only a few of them into focus and perceive them clearly. Other stimuli filtered out in the margin, which are either not perceived or perceived dimly. So this process of selection is determined by several factors, and some of these relate to the stimulus characteristics, while some relate to personal factors of the perceiver. And then the fifth one is that perception involves complex receptors and neural processes. We perceive what we sense, and sensing of objects follows a sensory channel consisting of receptor organs and afferent nerve fibers that transmit the neural energy to the sensory area in the cortex. By establishing synaptic association, the receptors encode the physical energy into a pattern of activity in the nerve fibers, and this refers to the process of transduction and transmission. Now, the neural structures in the cortex processes the encoded information, that is, translates the encoded impressions, and with help of past experiences and other mental operations, organize them in a structured pattern and identify the same by a definite meaning. Now, perception involves a complex receptor and neural processes in the sensory channels and central nervous system. Then there is next point, which is about perception is organization of stimuli. Now we perceive an object as united, a whole, and not as scattered sensory element. For example, we perceive a flower, a rose flower, and we do not perceive its elements separately, rather the entire elements are organized or unified together and identified as a single object, which is rose flower. So perception follows the principle of organization. Then the seventh point is perception has the attribute of constancy. Constancy or stability in the perceptual experience is one of the significant attributes, and this is an attribute according to which we tend to perceive an object in its original form, even if the object is different or if it varies. For example, if we move around in a room or see an object from different positions, the following retinal images are changed, and despite this we tend to perceive the object in their original form. So perceptual experience are unchanged, and we perceive the coal or anything, for example coal, as black without losing its shade of blackness, and if the same piece of coal is visualized in open sunlight, there would be no change in perceptual experience. Similarly, if a person is seen from a distance of 5 feet and again from a distance of 15 or 20 feet, so the perceptual experience of a person will be unchanged or invariant. If a person perceptual constancy does not operate, there would be a chaos and confusion for all of us. So because the same object would reappear or appear different each time we look at them. So this constancy is found in shape, size, brightness, color, and location. Then the eighth number is that perceptual experience are also flexible. Now, though constancy is perceptual experience, constancy in perceptual experience is an important attribute. It is also flexible. For example, some pictures appear different at different times. Similarly, some clothes are also designed that their shades appear changing moment by moment. Thus, under certain varying conditions, perceptual experience do not vary, which is known as the attribute of flexibility. Now, in the light of the above, the description which I have discussed in this video, the nature and various characteristics of perception, it can be more appropriately defined as perceptual or perception is a complex mental cognitive process through which we have immediate and meaningful knowledge of the present stimulus in the environment. And there is next characteristics, which is the ninth one, and all those characteristics are almost interrelated, or they are same. So the ninth one is perception is cognitive. Now, cognition means knowledge, and perception belongs to the knowing aspect of human behavior, and it gives us knowledge of objects or events or people. So it is the process of obtaining knowledge of external objects, events, and objective facts by use of the senses. And perceptual or perception involves sensation. Now, perception means knowledge which comes through sensation. So it means that sensation are essential to perception, and perception involves sensation. It is a process of interpreting or giving meaning to the sensation. Then the 11th one is that perception involves memory or thought. Now, perception is concerned with cognition and recognition of things. It involves memory and a spontaneous and perhaps unconscious interference or thought activity over and about the sensation. And perception is innate. Now, Gestaltists claim that the crucial perceptual processes are innate and do not depend directly on experience. In fact, most psychologists hold that innate factors and learned or environmental factors are both of vital significance in the development of perception. And perception is to analyze the world. The function of perception is to analyze the world around us into distinct objects. So perception is concerned with differentiating or breaking up of the outside world or perceptual field. Then perception is selective because perception is highly selective, and many stimuli act on our sense organs, but we do not respond to them, to all of them, and all of them do not excite our sense organs, and we have to select some of them, which is the process of selection in perception. So selection in perception depends upon personal likes and dislikes, interests, needs, motives, readiness or set, and other subjective, objective, social, and cultural factors. And perception is a direct experience. Perception is a direct experience with person's object or even through a group of sensation. And perception is presentative and representative because perception is presentative in the sense that it is influenced by external stimuli, and it is representative also because it involves memory and imagination. And perception is organizing, and one of the most striking characteristics of perception is the fact that it is nearly always organized. Perception involves organization, and organization facilitates perception. According to Murphy, perception, proper organization is necessary for understanding of a thing. And perception is not a simple juxtaposition of sensory elements, and it is fundamentally organized into coherent wholes. And about the change in perception, so perception is also characterized by change, and change is the basis of perception. Now, change in events and things facilitate perception. Then perception is attentive. Now, perception is attentive because perception is attentive in nature, and without attention, perception is not possible. So, attention is the prior condition of distinct and vivid perception. Then perception is accompanied by feelings. Perception is sometimes accompanied by feelings. For example, we experience arousal and feel pleasure, but we feel unpleasure when we are exposed to noise. And perception is accompanied by action. Perception is sometimes accompanied by action, and it is sometimes followed by an action. We climb a hill and perceive its steepness through or muscular action, or a bell is rung in the college and students have their classes. Now, here perception is followed by an action, and we react to certain objects in the environment in perception. Then about signs and meanings, so sometimes we perceive merely a sign of some fact, but we perceive the fact. We interpret the meaning of a sign and we perceive an object. For example, we perceive a friend on hearing her voice, and this is because the sound or her voice is a sign of her being present. Then there is figure and ground perception. So one of the most fundamental characteristics of perceptual organization is the way in which the visual field is segregated into one or more objects that are the central focus, that also called figure, and everything else which forms the ground. So figure and ground refers to the most basic and elementary of all forms of perceptual structure. So we perceive an object as a figure in the ground, and we perceive a picture. For example, we perceive a picture on the page, so the picture is a figure and the page is ground. Then the next one is perception is a complex process. Now, perception is very deep and complex process. It is a complex process, and it involves many processes. For example, receptor processes, unification processes, symbolic processes, and affective processes, which we will be discussing in this video about how perception involves processes. So the processes which are involved in perception. There is a receptor process in perceiving. Perception is not a unitary process. It involves several complex processes. So receptor process is one of them. So in perceiving, receptor process is necessarily and predominantly involved, and the object that we perceive is a stimulus received by our sense organs, which are specialized to receive it. We speak of the visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, kinesthetic, static, or organic perceptions. And in most of our daily life situation, when a stimulus appears, several receptor processes are simultaneously activated, and we not only see an object but also often hear or smell it at the same time. So the object present before us activates the object that is present before us. It activates the sensory mechanism attuned to that stimulus, and this evokes the receptor cells and initiate signals or impulses which are conducted through afferent nerves to the particular sensory area in the cortex, or which is a part in the brain. The sensory experience of the stimulus present in the environment take place. Now this whole process in the sensory channel is called receptor process. So the receptor process does not only involve receiving and transducing the stimulus, but also set of complicated patterns of events that represent the earlier stimulation. Now there are some other processes which are also involved in processes of perception. Now, in addition to receptive process, symbolic process is also involved. Now, the receptor process is the first process in perception, and it is the first process in perception is the receptor process. And the rose flower, for example, by virtue of its presence, stimulates different receptor cells and thus activate different receptor processes. And perception is also symbolic process. It also includes symbolic process. The sight and smell remind us of previous occasion we have had seen the rose, and these symbols appear as an image that represents the present stimulation of the object. So this symbol, or I will discuss the processes in step by step. So there are also affective and related processes. Seeing a rose may arouse pleasant or unpleasant feelings, or neither of the two. It may appear affectionate or arouse disgust, depending upon the associated feelings with the object being perceived at the moment. Now, aesthetic and evaluative process may aesthetic and evaluative experience may also be involved in our perception of situation. It may be perceived as beautiful or ugly or indifferent about the rose. Such evaluation depends upon affective feelings, one's interest and liking, as well as recall of the past experiences of pleasurable or unpleasurable events associated with any object being perceived. So in this way, the affective and symbolic processes overlap. And then there is a process of organization or unification which takes place. So the sensory input reacting the cortex from two different sense modulates the several sensory detail. For example, the color, size, shape, structure, or nature of aroma, etc., are organized together, and the representative symbols are retrieved to help in abstracting and generalizing the object, along with assigning a particular identifying name or name of recognition. So these things are done, and such mental processes enable us to perceive the object as an organized whole in the form of flower. So the receptor process is the first process. Then there is the process of unification, and the unification process is the second process in perception. For example, perception of the rose, a unified or unification of different sensation is necessary. Then symbolic process is a third. This is the third in the main processes, and most things have a sentiment or experience attached to them. So a rose reminds us of the friend who created and developed in us the interest for rose flower or gardening in general. Then affective process, for example, a flower, maybe it may arouse a happy memory of a friend or a feeling of sorrow at their separation. So though perception is a complex process, its basic constituents are still sensation and past experiences. While talking about complexity of perception, Professor Boring states that perception is a joint venture of the sense organs and the nervous system. So this was the end of the video. If your concept is clear, you can like the video. If not, you can ask us in the comment section and we will be happy to help you out. Plus, if you're new to this channel, you can subscribe to Dear Knowledge. You can subscribe to our channel and click on the bell icon so you will never ever miss any notification. Plus, you can share the link of this channel and this video with your family members and friends, because sharing is caring. Until then, Allah Hafiz.